The cellar door had not opened in 9 hours, and Seraphina Weatherly was beginning to understand that it might never open again. She pressed her palm against the cold oak, feeling the iron band that reinforced it, feeling the ancient splinters bite into her skin. Above her, muffled by stone and distance, she could hear the music. A quadrille, elegant and bright, the kind her stepmother had always favored. Somewhere in the great hall of Marlowe House, guests were dancing at the wedding of Miss Seraphina Weatherly to Lord Percival Hargrove. Somewhere above her, a bride was being celebrated. It simply was not her. She had worn the gown of her mother's wedding for this day. Ivory silk, yellowed now by 2 decades of careful keeping, the neckline embroidered with seed pearls her mother had sewn by hand. She had dressed by candlelight at dawn, alone in her chamber, her fingers trembling at every hook and ribbon. She had looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in 7 years since her father's death, she had allowed herself to believe that something good might happen to her. Then Livinia had come to her door with a glass of warmed wine and a smile. So soft Seraphina had mistaken it for kindness. "Drink, my darling girl," her stepmother had murmured. "Your hands are shaking. You must be composed." And Seraphina, who had learned long ago that accepting even small mercies from Livinia was safer than refusing them, had swallowed the wine. She remembered nothing after that but waking in darkness, her wedding gown crumpled around her, the taste of laudanum still bitter on her tongue. The cellar was cold. The silk gave no warmth. Her slippers had been removed, and the stone floor pressed against her bare feet like ice. She did not weep. She had learned, in the 7 years since her father was laid in the earth, that tears purchased nothing. Instead, she sat against the door and listened to the distant violins, and she tried to understand. Livinia had wanted this marriage. Livinia had arranged it. Lord Percival was 20 years Seraphina's senior, a widower with 3 small children and a fortune that had impressed the right people in London. It was, Livinia had declared, the best Seraphina could hope for. Better than she deserved, in truth, given her thinness, her pallor, her quiet manner that everyone mistook for dullness. So why then? Why had her stepmother drugged her and hidden her and left her here while the wedding proceeded without a bride? If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Now let me take you deeper into this tale, because Seraphina was about to learn that some locked doors exist not to trap us, but to turn us toward the one who has been searching for us all along. The answer, when it came to her at last, arrived in pieces, the way all terrible truths do. Livinia had a daughter of her own, Cordelia, who was blonde and warm and laughed prettily at gentlemen's jokes. Cordelia, who had been away at her aunt's house in Bath these past 6 weeks, returning only yesterday. Cordelia, who was precisely Seraphina's height and Seraphina's age, and who could wear, with the right veil and the right maneuvering, another woman's gown. A veiled bride, a signed contract, a fortune secured. By the time anyone understood what had happened, the deed would be done and the papers sealed and the marriage consummated. And who would dare to protest? Certainly not Seraphina, who had no allies, no protectors, no one in the world who remembered that her father had once called her his little lark. She leaned her head against the door and closed her eyes. So this was how the Weatherly name ended. Not in scandal, not in ruin, but in quiet erasure. She would be kept here until the thing was done. Perhaps moved in the night to some country house Livinia owned. Perhaps told, when she was eventually released, that she was mad, that she had run from her own wedding, that she had brought disgrace upon the family. Perhaps she would believe it herself by then. Captivity does strange things to a mind. She had read enough to know. The music above shifted to something slower. A waltz. Seraphina thought of her mother, dead 12 years now, who had once danced in this very house. She thought of her father, who had loved her mother past reason and who had never quite recovered from her loss. She thought of the girl she had been at 14, before Livinia had come into the house with her soft voice and her careful eyes, and she wondered what that girl would say if she could see her now, bridal silk torn at the hem, bare feet blue with cold, waiting in a cellar for a life that would never come. She did not hear the horses at first. The cellar was too deep, the walls too thick. What she heard was the shouting, raised voices in the hall above, the music cutting off mid-phrase. A woman's shriek, followed by Lavinia's voice, sharp with fury and something else, something almost like fear. Seraphina sat up slowly, her heart beginning to beat in a new rhythm. Feet pounded overhead, not the measured steps of dancers, but the heavy boots of men who did not belong in a ballroom. Then, distantly, another voice. A man's voice, deep and cold and unmistakably accustomed to being obeyed. Where is she? Where is the bride? She could not hear Livinia's answer, but she heard the response to it, and the response made her breath catch. I did not ask where your daughter is, madam. I asked where Seraphina Weatherly is. She scrambled to her feet, her slippers forgotten, her wedding gown dragging. She pressed both palms against the door and screamed. Not the scream of a frightened woman, but the scream of a drowning one, the last desperate note of a creature who knows no one will hear, but who must make the sound anyway. I am here. I am here. I am down here. The silence that followed was the longest of her life. Then the footsteps came, fast and certain, down the passageway and down the stone stairs. A man's voice, closer now, calling her name as though he had known it all his life. Miss Weatherly. Miss Weatherly, answer me. Here, she sobbed. I am here. The door shuttered. Something heavy struck it, again and again. The lock held. A single command. Stand back, Miss Weatherly. She moved away, her back against the far wall, and on the fourth blow the door gave way entirely. It did not merely open. It splintered at the hinges and crashed inward, and the man who had broken it stood in the wreckage with a lantern in one hand and murder in his eyes. He was tall. That was the first thing she saw. Taller than any man she knew, and broader in the shoulder, dressed not in wedding finery, but in a black riding coat, soaked through with rain. His hair was dark, his jaw hard, his eyes the color of winter rivers. A scar ran pale through his left eyebrow, old and healed, but unmistakable. He did not look like rescue. He looked like retribution. And for a terrible, wonderful moment Seraphina thought perhaps she had already died, and this was the dark angel come to settle her account. Then his eyes found her, and everything in his face changed. The fury did not leave him. It simply bent itself into something else, something careful and stunned and almost reverent, as though he had been prepared to find her dead and could not quite believe that she was not. He set the lantern down. He removed his coat in a single motion, and he crossed the cellar in 3 strides and knelt before her, holding the coat out between them like an offering. You are safe, he said. His voice was rougher up close, as though he did not use it often for gentle things. Whatever has been done to you, it is done. No one will touch you again. Seraphina stared at him. She did not know him. She was certain she did not know him. And yet something in his face, in the rigid control of his grief, was so familiar that for a moment she wondered if she had dreamed him once and forgotten. Who are you? She whispered. He looked at her as though the question surprised him, as though he had assumed she would know. I am Alasdair Ravenshaw, he said, Duke of Wyndmere. Your father, many years ago, saved my life. I have come to pay the debt. He did not touch her. That was the thing she remembered afterward, when her mind was clearer. He could have. He had every right and every strength to lift her from that cellar and carry her out himself, and no one would have thought it improper. Instead, he held out his coat, and he waited. He waited until she reached out with shaking fingers and took it. He waited until she drew it around her shoulders. He waited until she was ready, and only then did he stand and offer his hand. Can you walk? He asked. I do not know, she said truthfully. Then I will carry you. Not if you do not wish it. But I will not leave you here a moment longer than I must. She looked at his hand. Large, steady, scarred across the knuckles from whatever work he had done before he became a duke. She thought of Livinia upstairs, of Cordelia in her stolen veil, of Lord Percival waiting at an altar for a woman who was not his bride. She thought of the 7 years she had lived like a ghost in her own home, silent, swallowing, shrinking. She placed her hand in his. He closed his fingers around hers with infinite care, as though he held something breakable. When she tried to stand, her legs failed her, and before she could apologize he had swept her up against his chest as though she weighed no more than the coat around her shoulders. Close your eyes, he said quietly. You do not need to see this part. But she did not close her eyes. She had spent 9 hours in darkness, and she would never again choose not to see. He carried her up the stone stairs and through the servants' passage and into the great hall, where chaos had taken the shape of stillness. The musicians had fled. The guests stood in clusters, whispering, their faces pale. Cordelia sat on the floor in the center of the room, her veil torn away, her blonde hair tumbling loose, weeping in great, gulping sobs that fooled no one. Lord Percival stood over her with the dazed look of a man who had just been robbed and did not yet understand by whom. Livinia was not weeping. Livinia stood by the great fireplace, her face a mask of cold calculation, and when she saw Seraphina carried into the room in the arms of the Duke of Wyndmere, something in that mask cracked at last. "What is the meaning of this?" Livinia said, her voice rising above the murmurs. "This is an outrage. That girl was ill. She has been delirious for days. Your Grace, you cannot possibly believe." Alasdair Ravenshaw did not answer her. He did not look at her. He crossed the hall with Seraphina in his arms and set her down gently on the velvet chair nearest the fire, and he wrapped his coat more firmly around her, and only then did he turn. The silence that followed his turning was the kind that happens before a storm breaks. "Lord Percival," he said. Lord Percival started. "Your Grace, I had no knowledge. I swear to you. You will leave this house tonight," Alasdair said. "You will not speak to Miss Weatherly again. You will consider yourself fortunate that my sole concern at this moment is her welfare, because if I turned my attention fully to you, you would not enjoy the result." Lord Percival swallowed and bowed and left. He did not look at Cordelia. He simply walked from the house as though walking from a dream he wished to forget. Alasdair's eyes moved then to Livinia, and Seraphina, watching from the chair, understood for the first time what it meant when men spoke of the Duke of Wyndmere's temper. She had heard the name, of course. Everyone had heard the name. The Cold Duke, they called him in London. The Hermit of Wyndmere. A man who had inherited young, who refused invitations, who had buried his wife and his infant son in the same week and had not been seen at a social gathering in 9 years. A man who was said to have fought in Spain and come home with frost in his veins. She had heard all of it, and none of it, she now understood, had been true. He was not cold. He was simply contained, the way a furnace is contained. And the door of the furnace had just begun to open. "Madam Weatherly," he said. "I am not a Weatherly," Livinia said sharply. "I was Lady Helston before I married Seraphina's father." "A courtesy you abused," Alasdair said, the moment her father drew his last breath. "You have been watched, madam, for 7 years. Since the day Oliver Weatherly died and his will was read. You have been watched by men who answer to me. Every letter, every ledger, every servant dismissed from this house for asking the wrong questions. I have a paper trail that will put you in prison and your daughter alongside you. And if a single hair on Miss Weatherly's head had been harmed tonight beyond the harm already done, I would not be turning you over to the magistrate. I would be handling the matter myself." He paused. He turned back toward Seraphina, and his voice gentled so completely that she almost did not recognize it as the same voice that had just shattered her stepmother. "Miss Weatherly," he said, "will you come with me? I have a carriage at the door, and a physician riding with it, and a suite of rooms prepared at Wyndmere Hall where you may rest as long as you require. No one in this house will trouble you again, but I will not take you anywhere you do not wish to go." Seraphina looked at him, then at Livinia, who was trembling, then at Cordelia, who was still weeping on the floor, then at the chair she sat in the house her father had built, in the life that had been stolen from her piece by piece, until tonight, when it had nearly been stolen entirely. "Yes," she said, "I will come with you." She stood. The coat was far too large for her, and the silk of her gown whispered against the floor as she walked. She passed Livinia without looking at her. She passed Cordelia without looking. And when Alasdair Ravenshaw offered her his arm, she took it, and together they walked out of Mirlow House into the rain. The carriage was black lacquer with the crest of Wyndmere upon the door, a raven in silver silhouette, wings spread above a single star. A footman opened the door, and Alasdair handed her up as carefully as if she were made of glass. Inside, an elderly man in a dark coat rose from his seat and bowed. "This is Dr. Firth," Alasdair said, settling himself across from her. "He is the most discreet physician in England. He will examine you, if you permit it." She nodded. She could not quite speak. The carriage began to move, and Dr. Firth, with the gentleness of a grandfather, took her wrist and felt her pulse, and looked into her eyes with a small lantern, and asked her soft questions about what she had eaten, what she had drunk. When he had finished, he nodded to Alasdair. "Laudanum," he said. A substantial dose. She is fortunate it was not more. The young lady is dehydrated, chilled, and profoundly exhausted, but she is not in danger. Rest, warmth, nourishment. By morning she will be improved. Thank you, Alasdair said. He turned to Seraphina. If at any moment you wish to leave, you have only to say so. A coach will be brought for you. Whatever you need. I give you my word. Seraphina looked at him across the narrow space of the carriage. The rain traced patterns down the window behind his head, and the lamplight painted his face in amber and shadow. She could see, now that the fury had gone out of him, how tired he was. Not the tiredness of a man who had ridden hard through a storm, though that was there too, but the tiredness of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Your Grace, she said. He looked up. Alasdair, he said. If you will. I have not been anyone's grace tonight. Alasdair, she said, trying the name. It felt strange in her mouth. Strange and somehow already familiar. You said my father saved your life. When? A long time ago, he said. You were perhaps 6 years old. You would not remember me. But he wrote to me every year on the anniversary of that day, until he could no longer hold a pen. And when he died, his solicitor sent me a letter he had written and left with his private papers, to be delivered to me in the event of his death. In that letter he told me what he feared would happen to you. And he asked, though he had no right to ask, that if the worst came to pass, I would not let his daughter be lost. What did he fear? Seraphina whispered. Alasdair's jaw tightened. He feared that your stepmother would destroy you, he said. That she would take the inheritance he had left in trust. That she would marry you off to the highest bidder. That she would isolate you from anyone who could help. He feared that you would come to believe you had no worth outside of what a man would pay for you. He looked at her directly. He was not wrong, was he? No, Seraphina said. Her eyes filled. He was not wrong. She did not weep then. She had spent 9 hours not weeping, and she could not remember how to begin. But something shifted in her chest. Some long frozen thing began, very slowly, to crack. Alasdair saw it. She saw him see it. And he did a thing she did not expect. He leaned forward and took her hand in both of his own, and he did not speak. He simply held it. He held it as the carriage rattled on through the rain, as Dr. Firth dozed discreetly in the corner, as the miles of Hertfordshire unrolled themselves in darkness outside. He held it as though he had been waiting a long time to hold someone's hand, and had forgotten how, and was remembering. When she finally spoke again, her voice was very small. Alasdair, she said. Yes. Why have you come tonight? Why this night, of all nights? Why, after 7 years? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because I received intelligence 3 days ago that your wedding was set for this morning, and that Lord Percival had never actually met you. He had been courting Cordelia, under the impression that she was Miss Seraphina Weatherly. The deception was to be completed at the altar. I rode from Wyndmere when the sun rose yesterday and did not stop until I reached your door. He paused. And because, he added more quietly, I promised your father. And I have failed a great many people in my life, Seraphina. I did not intend to fail him as well. She looked down at her hand in his. She looked at the black wool of his coat around her shoulders, and the wedding silk beneath it, and her bare, bruised feet on the carriage floor. She thought of the girl she had been at dawn, putting on her mother's dress by candlelight. That girl, she realized, had been right to believe that something good might happen to her today. She had simply been wrong about what form it would take. And you have not failed him, she said. Her voice was still small, but it was steady. You came. That is enough. He did not answer, but his hand tightened around hers, just slightly, and she felt, for the first time in 7 years, a thing she had almost forgotten the shape of. Not hope exactly. Hope was too bright a word for this quiet, trembling thing. But something in its family. Something that suggested that the world was not, after all, only cellars and locked doors. They rode in silence for a long while after that. Seraphina found that she could not quite let go of his hand, and he made no move to reclaim it. Outside, the rain softened to a steady whisper against the carriage roof. Dr. Firth slept now with his chin upon his chest, and his breathing was the only other sound within the carriage. She thought of the cold duke the world believed him to be, the hermit who had buried his family and forgotten how to live, and she thought of the man before her, who had ridden a day and a night through rain to keep a promise. They did not seem to be the same person. Perhaps the world had only ever seen the door, and had never troubled to learn what was behind it. "Alasdair," she said, "will they come after me? My stepmother, Lord Percival." "No," he said, "not where you are going. Wyndmere Hall has a wall around it that was built to withstand a civil war. More to the point, I have letters from 3 magistrates and a warrant sworn out this morning, which will be served upon Madam Weatherly before the sun rises. She will be arrested for conspiracy, for fraud, for the attempted abduction of an heiress. Her daughter will be named as an accessory. I did not come unprepared tonight." She absorbed this. 7 years, she said. "You have been preparing for 7 years." "I had no legal standing before," he said. "Your stepmother was your guardian under your father's will. I could watch, and I could gather evidence, but I could not intervene unless she moved against you openly. Tonight she did. I am sorry that I could not come sooner. I am sorry for every year you spent in that house, alone, believing no one remembered you. Please understand. Someone did. Someone has remembered you every day." Seraphina turned her face toward the window. The tears came then, at last, and she did not try to stop them. She did not sob. She did not shake. She simply wept, and Alasdair, across the carriage, did not look away and did not try to soothe her. He only held her hand, and she understood that this was a kindness she had not known she needed. To be allowed to cry without being asked to stop. To be seen without being fixed. When the worst of it had passed, she drew a breath that felt like the first full breath of her life. She turned back to him. His eyes were wet too, she saw. He did not pretend otherwise. "Tell me about him," she said. "My father. I remember him, of course. But I was so young when he died, and my stepmother took away his letters, his papers, even his portrait from the gallery. I have so little left of him. Tell me what he was like when you knew him." Alasdair smiled, and it was the first smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face entirely. "He was the kindest man I have ever known," he said. "He was brave past reason and foolish past reason, which are often the same thing. He loved your mother beyond sense. He once told me that the day you were born was the only day in his life when he had wept from pure joy, and that he had not known a man could weep so." Seraphina put her free hand to her mouth. "Tell me more," she whispered. "I will tell you," he said, "everything I remember. For as many nights as it takes. You have time now, Seraphina. No one will take it from you again." The carriage crested a hill, and through the streaked window she saw it at last. Wyndmere Hall, rising from the valley below like something carved from the night itself. Pale stone, a dozen tall windows lit against the dark, and beyond it the dim suggestion of gardens and the silver gleam of a lake. Lights burned in every window. They had been kept burning, she realized, for her. Almost there, Alasdair said quietly, "Mrs. Penrose, my housekeeper, has a room prepared. A fire has been laid. In the morning, if you wish, we may speak further. If you do not wish, you need not see me for a week. Whatever you require." She looked at him, and she heard herself say something that surprised her. "I wish to see you in the morning," she said. He was still for a moment. Then he nodded. "In the morning, then." The great iron gates of Wyndmere swung open to receive them, and the horses passed beneath the arch, and somewhere above, in a chamber she had never seen, the fire was burning for her. She woke to sunlight. For a long moment, she did not understand where she was. The bed beneath her was soft in a way she had forgotten beds could be, layered with linens that smelled of lavender and something warmer, cedar perhaps, and the canopy above her was cream damask embroidered with silver thread. A fire burned in a marble grate on the opposite wall, tended so quietly she had not heard the maid enter. Outside the tall windows, a gray autumn sky hung over lawns she could see stretching to a line of yew trees, and somewhere in the distance a bell was ringing, low and slow, as though counting out the hours of a world that had learned to be patient. Seraphina sat up. The motion made her dizzy, and she waited for the room to settle. She was wearing a nightgown of fine white linen, a nightgown she did not remember putting on. Someone had bathed her. She remembered that dimly, as one remembers a dream. An older woman with gentle hands, warm water, a soft sponge, a cup of broth held to her lips, a voice murmuring that she was safe, that she should sleep, that no one would disturb her. Mrs. Penrose, she thought. The housekeeper. She looked down at her hands on the coverlet. They were clean. Her nails had been trimmed. Someone had cared for her while she slept, and she had been so deep in exhaustion that she had not even stirred. She could not remember the last time anyone had cared for her while she slept. Not since her mother, perhaps. Not since she was very small. A soft knock sounded at the door. Seraphina pulled the coverlet higher. "Yes," she said, and was surprised to hear her own voice sound almost normal. The door opened a careful inch, and a silver head appeared. "May I enter, miss?" Mrs. Penrose was perhaps 60, with the square, capable build of a woman who had run great households all her life, and a face that was kind in the way that certain old faces are kind, not because they have been spared sorrow, but because they have met it and made peace. "You may," Seraphina said. Mrs. Penrose came in with a tray. "Porridge," she said, setting it upon a small table by the window, "and toast, and honey, and weak tea with milk. Dr. Firth says you are to eat slowly and not too much at once, for your stomach has been empty for some time. There is no hurry. The Duke asks after you every quarter hour, miss, and I have been telling him firmly to leave you be until you are ready." Seraphina smiled. She was surprised that she could smile. "He is waiting, then," she said. "He is, miss. In the morning room. He has been there since 6 o'clock, and it is now near 11. I do not think he has slept at all." Seraphina looked toward the window. She thought of Alasdair, tall and soaked through and kneeling before her on the cellar floor, holding out his coat. She thought of him holding her hand in the carriage, saying nothing, not asking her to stop weeping. "I should dress," she said. Mrs. Penrose nodded and moved to a large wardrobe. "There are gowns here, miss. They belonged to the Duke's late sister, who was near your size. She died some years ago, and the Duke kept her things because he could not bring himself to give them away. When he learned you were coming, he asked me to see which might fit you. I hope you will not find it distressing." Seraphina looked at the wardrobe. "His sister," she said softly. "I did not know he had a sister." "His only one," Mrs. Penrose said. "Lady Isolde. She was very dear to him. She died in the same year as the Duchess and the little boy. The Duke has had a great deal to bear, miss." She paused. "He will not speak of it. But I have been in this house 40 years, and I can tell you, I have not seen him truly sit at table with another living soul since that year. Not until last night. Not until you." Seraphina looked down at her hands. She did not know what to say. She chose the simplest of the gowns, a soft gray wool with a pale blue sash, and Mrs. Penrose helped her dress with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who had seen a great many brides and a great many invalids, and was prepared to treat Seraphina as a little of both. When she was ready, she stood before the mirror and barely recognized herself. The girl who looked back at her was thinner than she remembered, and paler, with shadows beneath her eyes and a bruise on her temple she had not known she carried. But her hair had been brushed and braided. Her mouth was not the pinched mouth of a woman waiting for a blow. It was simply a mouth, quiet and uncertain, belonging to a woman who did not yet know what she was. Mrs. Penrose took her arm as they descended the stairs. The staircase was broad and curving, the banister polished walnut, and at the turn a tall window looked out over a courtyard where grooms were leading horses and a gardener was cutting the last of the autumn roses. Seraphina paused on the landing. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is," Mrs. Penrose said. "It has been too quiet, these 9 years. But a house remembers, miss. A house knows when it is waking up." She found him in the morning room, as Mrs. Penrose had said. The room was smaller than Seraphina had expected of a duke's house, paneled in pale wood, with a low fire and 2 deep chairs drawn near to it, and a breakfast table by the window set for 2. Alasdair stood when she entered. He had changed from his riding clothes into a coat of dark blue wool, and his hair was damp, as though he had bathed not long before. He had shaved. He looked younger than he had in the carriage. He did not speak at once. He only stood and looked at her, and in his face she saw a quiet astonishment, as though he could not quite believe she was there. "Good morning," she said. The words sounded strange and ordinary in the still room. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low. "Please, sit. You must be hungry." She sat. He sat across from her. Mrs. Penrose brought in fresh tea and withdrew. For a moment they simply looked at one another over the china, and Seraphina felt a small, warm thing unfold inside her chest. It was not exactly ease. She did not yet know how to be at ease. But it was something close. Something like the first hour after a long illness, when one discovers one can sit up without fainting. "You slept well?" he said. "I slept at all," she said. "That is remarkable in itself." He almost smiled. "It is," he said. Seraphina, there is a great deal I must tell you, and there is no good way to begin, and so I will simply begin. Your stepmother was arrested at dawn. She is at present in the custody of the magistrate at Ware. Your stepsister has also been taken. Lord Percival has departed for the continent. He will not return, I think, any time soon. The charges against your stepmother are conspiracy, fraud, and the false imprisonment of an heiress. She will stand trial at the Hertford Assizes in the spring. Seraphina set down her teacup. Her hand shook only a little. An heiress, she said. Yes, he said. That is the second thing I must tell you. Your father left a will that your stepmother did not show you. It was kept with his solicitor, a Mr. Ashton of Lincoln's Inn, who was instructed to hold it privately until your 21st year. You came of age 8 months ago. Under the terms of that will, you inherit Marlow House, the Weatherly estate in Norfolk, the London townhouse in Brook Street, and an annual income of £11,000, rising to £15,000 when you marry. Your stepmother has been collecting that income unlawfully for 7 years. She has spent a great deal of it. Mr. Ashton has been gathering evidence of her misuse. You will recover most of what was taken, but not all. Seraphina stared at him. £11,000, she said. You are a very wealthy woman, Seraphina. You have been a very wealthy woman for most of your life, and you did not know it. Your father made me one of your trustees. He named me in his will, alongside Mr. Ashton and an uncle of yours who has since died. Your stepmother destroyed the copy of the will that was kept in the house, and she never spoke of the existence of trustees, and I could not approach you openly without alerting her. I have paid for your dressmakers these 7 years, Seraphina. I have paid for the books that appeared mysteriously at your door. I have paid for the piano tuner who came every autumn, though your stepmother dismissed him as soon as his work was done. There have been 1,000 small acts of care, none of them sufficient, all of them invisible. I tell you this not for your gratitude. I tell you because you deserve to know that you have not been entirely alone in the world. You only believed that you were. Seraphina could not speak. Her throat closed. She looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band her father had given her on her 10th birthday, the only piece of her mother's jewelry that Livinia had not found a way to claim. She turned it around her finger as she had always turned it when she could not speak. After a long while, she raised her eyes. Why, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do all of that? For a girl you had not seen since she was 6 years old. Alasdair was quiet. Then he said, I will tell you. But it is a long story, and you should eat first. Tell me first, she said. Please. He looked at her across the table. Very well, he said. I was 22 years old, he said, and a new minted lieutenant in His Majesty's army, and I was in Spain. The campaign had gone badly. My company was cut off from the main force near a town called Arapiles, and we were holding a ridge that no one had told us mattered, and we were losing. I took a bullet in the thigh and another that grazed my scalp, and I fell, and I should have died there. I was left for dead. When I woke, I was in a farmhouse, and there was an English officer tending my wound with his own hands. He had crossed a field under fire to retrieve me. He did not know my name. He did not know my family. He simply would not let me die alone on foreign soil, because he said it was not the kind of thing a man should allow when he could prevent it. That officer was your father. Seraphina drew in a slow breath. He never told me, she said. He would not, Alasdair said. He did not consider it remarkable. He spoke, on the ride back to our lines, only of his wife and his daughter. He had been given leave, he told me, but he had not gone home, because the campaign was not finished, and he did not wish to abandon his men. He spoke of you as one speaks of a lamp kept burning in a distant window. He said, Ravenshaw, if you ever find yourself a father, you will understand. There is no weight like it, and there is no light like it. He said his daughter had eyes the color of rain. He said you were 6 years old and you had just learned to read, and that you read aloud to him from Gulliver's Travels, and that you could not quite manage the word Lilliputian. He laughed when he told me that. I have never forgotten the way he laughed. Seraphina was crying. She did not try to hide it. Alasdair's hand moved across the table and found hers, and she held on to his fingers like a child holds on in the dark. I meant to visit, he said. I meant to write more often. I was called back to the regiment within weeks, and I was in the peninsula until the war ended, and by the time I came home I had a duchy I had not expected, a wife chosen for me by my father before he died, and a great many things to learn about how to be a man whose father had not lived long enough to teach him. I wrote to your father once a year. He wrote back. I never saw him again. When his letters stopped, I wrote to the house and received a stiff reply from your stepmother saying he had died, and would we please not trouble the household further. Seraphina pressed her free hand to her mouth. I did not even know, she whispered. I did not know that he had friends. She told me he had no one. Alasdair's jaw tightened. He had a great many people who loved him, Seraphina. She could not prevent us from loving him. She could only prevent us from reaching you. A silence fell between them. It was not an empty silence. It was the silence after a bell has been struck, in which the air still hums. Outside, a blackbird called in the garden. The fire shifted. At last Seraphina drew her hand gently back and wiped her face and drank her tea, because she did not know what else to do, and because she had been taught long ago that one did not refuse tea, no matter what was happening inside one. There is more, Alasdair said softly. There is a third thing I must tell you, and it is the hardest. What is it? She said. He hesitated. I am your trustee until you marry, he said. That is the law. Your money, your properties, your name, all of them pass to you only when you take a husband, and in that moment your husband becomes the sole master of them. Your father wrote the will that way because it was the only way he could write it, in the world as it is. He tried to protect you. He could not protect you absolutely. And so, Seraphina, I must ask you a question, and I must ask it now, while your stepmother is in prison and while the magistrate is waiting for instruction. Do you wish to remain my ward until some suitor you have chosen freely presents himself? Or do you wish me to find you a guardian whose name is less entangled with scandal than mine? Because there will be scandal, Seraphina. Society will say a great many things about last night, and about this house, and about us. I cannot prevent them from saying it. I can only tell you, honestly, what you will face, and let you choose. If you are hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Now let us return to Seraphina, who is about to make the first truly free choice of her life. She looked at him, really looked. The scar through his brow, the gray in his hair that was perhaps premature, the shadows beneath his eyes that had been there long before last night. She thought of all the years he had watched her from a distance, paying for piano tuners and dressmakers, unable to speak, unable to show himself. She thought of a young lieutenant bleeding in a Spanish farmhouse, and a man who had carried him out. She thought of her father, saying there was no weight like it, and there was no light like it. Alasdair, she said. Yes, I will remain your ward. He let out a breath he had clearly been holding. As you wish, he said, but I have two conditions. Name them. I do not wish to hear again that you are a scandal to me. You are not. You are the only reason I stood upright this morning, and I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of people whose opinions I have never known and will never meet. That is the first condition. He was silent. His throat worked. Very well, he said. And the second is that you tell me about your sister, and about your wife, and about your son. Not today, perhaps, but soon. Because you told me last night that my father had a great many people who loved him, and I believed you. I would like to believe also that the same has been true for you, that you have not been so alone as the world says. His eyes closed. For a moment he did not answer. When he opened them, she saw that he was fighting for composure, and losing, and choosing not to hide it. Soon, he said. I will tell you. Soon. Good, she said. Now please, may I have some of that toast? I find I am very hungry after all. The days that followed settled into a strange, slow music. Seraphina awoke each morning to the same gray autumn light, and each morning Mrs. Penrose came with tea and warmed bread, and each morning Seraphina could eat a little more than the day before. She walked in the gardens when her strength allowed, leaning on Mrs. Penrose's arm at first, then on nothing but a silver-topped cane that had belonged to Alasdair's grandfather. She read in the library, which was the largest room she had ever seen and which Alasdair had told her, with a gravity that almost made her laugh, was entirely at her disposal. She slept deeply. She woke without dread. It was the ordinariness of these things that astonished her most. She had not known that life could be so ordinary. She had thought ordinary was a thing that happened to other people. She saw Alasdair every day, though never for very long. He seemed to understand without being told that she needed quiet more than company, and he gave her quiet without making her ask for it. He took his breakfast with her, and read with her sometimes in the library in the late afternoon, each of them in their own chair, a companionable silence between them broken only by the turning of pages and the occasional question. He did not touch her. He had not touched her since the carriage. But sometimes, when she looked up from her book, she found him looking at her, and he did not look away. And in those moments the silence changed its weather, and Seraphina would feel a warmth in her face that she did not understand and did not wish to understand, not yet. On the 5th day, she asked him about his sister. They were walking in the yew garden, and the afternoon was cold but still, and the gravel crunched beneath their feet with a small, precise sound that Seraphina had come to love. He did not answer at once. Isolde was 19, he said finally, when my wife and my son died. She nursed them both. She caught the fever herself a week later. I was in London when it happened. I had gone to see my solicitor about some stupid piece of business that seemed, at the time, important. When the express reached me, I rode through the night, and I did not eat, and I did not stop, and when I arrived I was in time to hold my sister's hand for perhaps an hour before she died. He paused. She was looking for me, he said. She kept asking for me. She kept saying, "Where's Alasdair?" He promised. I had promised her we would go to Italy in the spring. She had never seen the sea. Seraphina did not speak. She laid her hand very lightly upon his sleeve. He looked down at her hand, and then at her face, and something in his expression broke open for an instant, before he closed it again with the practiced care of a man who has spent 9 years learning how. I have not spoken of her, he said, to anyone, in almost a decade. Then I am honored, Seraphina said, that you have spoken of her to me. They walked a little further in silence. At the end of the yew walk there was a small stone bench, gray with lichen, and they sat upon it. The sun was beginning to sink. The light was honey-colored and slant, and very gentle. "Tell me about your mother," Alasdair said. "I know you were 12 when she died. I know she embroidered the pearls on the gown you wore that night. I would like to know the rest." So Seraphina told him. She told him about the rose garden her mother had kept, and the way her mother had laughed when she laughed, head thrown back, entirely without shame. She told him about the summer her mother had taken her to the sea, and how she had been frightened of the waves at first, and how her mother had walked into them with her, hand in hand, and had said, "They are only water, my little lark, they cannot take you if I am holding on." She told him things she had not said aloud in many years, not to anyone, because there had been no one to tell. And Alasdair listened with the same stillness he had shown her in the cellar, the same absolute attention, as though her words were worth the hearing. When she had finished, the sun was almost gone, and her hands were cold, and she looked down and saw that he had, at some point, laid his own hand over hers upon the bench. She did not move. Neither did he. "Seraphina," he said, his voice low. "Yes, I think I should not be sitting beside you like this. I think I should stand up and walk you back to the house and send you to warm yourself before the fire." "Why?" she whispered, though she knew why. "Because," he said, and the word was rough in his throat, "because I am 41 years old, and I have been alone for 9 years, and I have forgotten almost everything I used to know about how to behave in the presence of a woman I am not entirely indifferent to. And you, Seraphina, you are not a woman I am entirely indifferent to. You have not been for some time. And you have been in this house less than a week, and you are my ward, and I will not. I will not take advantage of the hours we are permitted alone. It would not be honorable. It would not be right." She looked at him. She felt no fear. She felt something else, a tightening in her chest that was neither dread nor grief, and she realized with quiet astonishment that she had never, in 21 years of life, felt it before. "Alasdair," she said. "Yes, you have not taken advantage of anything. You have sat beside me on a bench in the sunset, and laid your hand over mine, and told me that you are not indifferent to me. That is not a taking. That is an offering." She did not move her hand. "If I wish to refuse it, I shall refuse it. If I do not, I do not. Please do not decide on my behalf. I have had a great many decisions made on my behalf. I would prefer that this one be mine." He looked at her for a long moment. He looked as though he did not quite know what to do with what she had said. "And you do not refuse it?" he said at last, very softly. "No," she said. "I do not." They sat there until the last of the light was gone. They did not speak again, but when they rose, he offered her his arm, and she took it, and they walked back through the yew garden to the warm lit windows of the house. and she understood that something had changed between them that could not be unchanged. Whether it could survive what was coming, she did not yet know, because what was coming was a letter that would arrive the following morning, sealed in black wax, from a cousin of her late father's whom she had never met. A letter that would shatter the quiet of Wyndmere as surely as Alasdair had shattered the cellar door. The letter arrived with the morning post, and Mrs. Penrose carried it to the breakfast room on a small silver tray, and Seraphina saw at once that something was wrong by the tightness in the housekeeper's mouth. Black wax, Mrs. Penrose said quietly, setting the tray beside Alasdair's plate. Addressed to Miss Weatherly, sir. I thought you ought to see it with her. Alasdair took up the letter and turned it in his hand. The seal bore an unfamiliar device, a hawk in profile with a sprig of yew in its beak. He frowned. Do you know this crest? He asked. Seraphina shook her head. He broke the seal and read. Seraphina watched his face change. It did not change dramatically. It simply closed, as a window closes at the approach of bad weather. And when he had finished, he set the letter down upon the tablecloth and laid his hand flat upon it, as though to keep it from flying away. What is it? She said. Her voice was steady. She had learned, in 7 years under Livinia's roof, that the worst news is best met sitting upright. He looked at her. Your father had a cousin, he said, a man named Godfrey Weatherly. Your father rarely spoke of him. They had quarreled when they were young men over a woman, I believe, and never reconciled. Godfrey has been living in the West Indies these 15 years. He has received word of your stepmother's arrest. He is on a ship bound for England. He writes, Seraphina, that he intends to contest your father's will. He claims that as the nearest surviving male relative, he has prior claim to Myrlo and the Norfolk estate, and that he will petition the Court of Chancery to set your inheritance aside. Seraphina set down her cup. Can he do that? She asked. Alasdair was silent a long moment. He can try, he said at last. Your father's will is sound. Mr. Ashton drew it, and Mr. Ashton does not draw bad wills. But Chancery is slow, Seraphina. It is slow beyond belief. A case of this kind might drag on for years. And while it is in progress, your estates will be sequestered. You will have no access to your income. Your stepmother's trial may be delayed, her assets held. You will live, for the duration, on whatever generosity your guardian can extend to you. That is to say, on mine. She looked at him. I see, she said. He pushed back from the table and walked to the window. He stood with his back to her for a long moment, and when he turned she saw that his face had taken on that contained, furnace look she had seen in the ballroom at Myrlo. There is another way, he said. What way? If you were married, he said, the will's provisions for your majority would be fully enacted. Your husband would hold the estates in trust for you under English law. But if your husband were, say, a duke of some standing, with his own fortune and his own legal resources, a cousin newly arrived from the Indies would find the petition rather harder to prosecute. Seraphina did not answer at once. She was aware of her heart beating. She was aware of the teacup cooling between her palms. She was aware, too, that he had not looked at her as he spoke. He had addressed the window and the garden beyond it, as though the suggestion were a piece of legal reasoning and nothing more. Alasdair, she said. Yes. Are you asking me to marry you in order to protect my inheritance? He turned then, and she saw his face, and she saw that the question had struck him harder than she had intended. I am asking you, he said slowly, to consider whether a marriage of our names might preserve what is yours by right. I am not asking you to marry me for any other reason. I would not. Not in this house, not after last week, not while you are still recovering from what was done to you. I will not have you feel that you have been rescued from one cage only to be placed inside another, even one I would count myself honored to share. He drew breath. If you do not wish it, we will fight the case in the courts, and you will live as my ward for as long as it takes. And when it is settled, you will go out into the world a free and wealthy woman, and you will marry whom you choose, or marry no one. And I will be glad of it, for your sake. Seraphina stood. She walked around the table until she was standing before him by the window. He was so much taller than she that she had to tip her head up to look him in the face. Alasdair Ravenshaw, she said. Yes, that is the clumsiest proposal of marriage I have ever heard in my life. He stared at her. His mouth opened and closed. And then, for the first time since she had known him, he laughed. It was a short laugh, quiet, almost disbelieving, but it was a laugh, and in it she heard all the years he had not laughed, cracking open like ice on a pond in spring. "I expect it is," he said. "I have had little practice. None, in fact." "Well," she said, "you must try again." "Try again," he repeated. "Yes, but this time, if you please, look at me while you do it. And tell me the truth. Not the legal truth. The other one." He was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, a gardener pushed a barrow across the lawn, unaware that a man's life was being remade 12 feet from him. At last Alasdair said, "The truth, Seraphina, is that I have loved you since the moment I laid eyes on you on that cellar floor. No, that is not honest either. I have loved you since the first letter your father wrote me, in which he said his daughter read him Gulliver aloud and could not manage the word Lilliputian. I did not know it was love then. I thought it was a debt. I thought it was a promise I had made to a dying man. I rode to Myrlo last week believing that I was going to rescue a child I had once met, a child I had sworn to protect, and I broke down a door and found a woman instead, and she put her hand in mine and came out of that cellar. And by the time we reached Wyndmere, I understood that the debt had become something else entirely, and that I had been walking toward this week for 7 years without knowing it. I do not ask you to marry me because of your cousin. I ask you to marry me because I cannot imagine this house without you in it, and because I cannot imagine the rest of my life without you in it, and because if I live 50 more years and you are not beside me for them, they will be 50 years of a man going through the motions of a life he has already finished. Marry me, Seraphina, not to save your estates. I can save your estates with lawyers. Marry me because I love you. That is the only reason I am fit to offer." She did not answer at once. She reached up, slowly, and laid her hand against his cheek. He closed his eyes. "Yes," she said. He opened them. "Yes," she said again. "Yes, Alasdair. Yes, I will." He drew her against him, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her, but he did not. He only held her. He held her the way he had held her hand in the carriage, as though she were something breakable and precious, and his face was bent against her hair, and she felt him shaking, very faintly, though he made no sound. She understood that he was weeping. She understood that he had not wept in 9 years. She held him tighter. They were married 3 weeks later, quietly, in the small stone chapel at Wyndmere, by a country vicar who had baptized Alasdair's sister Isolde, and who cried steadily throughout the ceremony, without seeming to notice he was doing it. Mrs. Penrose stood as Seraphina's attendant, her capable hands for once unsteady, a handkerchief clutched in one of them that she pretended she did not need. Mr. Ashton came up from London to give her away, a dry, careful man whom Seraphina had met for the first time only a fortnight before, and who had wept when she had thanked him for keeping her father's will safe for 7 years. There were no other guests. Alasdair had asked her if she wished for more. She had said no. She wished for this, in this chapel, with these people, on this day. The scandal of a rapid match could be borne. The joy of a small one could not be divided. She had lived too long in a house that turned every private thing into a public performance. This, today, was hers and his and no one else's, and it would be told, if it was told at all, in the voices of people who had been there and had loved them. She wore a gown of cream silk made by the Wyndmere village dressmaker, who had refused all payment and accepted at last only a jar of honey from the estate's bees. Around her throat she wore a string of seed pearls that had been her mother's, which Alasdair had recovered from a pawnbroker in Hertford where Livinia had sold them 6 years earlier. He had said nothing when he placed them in her hand the night before the wedding. He had simply watched her face, and when she had begun to cry he had put his arms around her and held her until she could speak again. When he fastened the clasp at her nape on the morning of the ceremony, his fingers trembled, and she turned and placed her palm against his chest and said, "Alasdair, breathe." And he breathed and laughed, and she walked down the short aisle to him. And when the vicar asked him whether he would take her, he said, "I will," before the vicar had quite finished asking. The vicar blinked. Mr. Ashton, in the front pew, smiled for the first time in any capacity Seraphina had ever witnessed. And Alasdair looked at her with an expression she would carry with her every day for the rest of her life, and which she could never afterwards describe, because there were no words for it that were not inadequate, and no silence for it that was not more adequate still. The case of Godfrey Weatherly came before the Court of Chancery in the spring, and it was dismissed within the hour. Mr. Ashton argued it. He argued it with a cold precision that Seraphina would not have thought him capable of, and he produced the original will, signed by her father, witnessed by 2 officers of his regiment and a Hertfordshire magistrate, and he produced the letter her father had sent to Alasdair upon the occasion of naming him trustee, and he produced the records of Livinia's frauds, and the cousin Godfrey, who had arrived from the Indies gaunt and loud and smelling of rum, found himself publicly humiliated and privately instructed by the judge never to raise the matter again under any circumstances whatsoever. He retreated to an inn in Covent Garden and was not heard from further, and Seraphina, who had sat quietly at the back of the court in a plain dark gown and a plain dark bonnet with her husband's hand in hers, left without looking at him. She had nothing to say to him. She had never met him. He was less than a stranger to her. He was a man who had tried to steal what her father had given her, and her father had made provision for exactly such men, and the provision had held. Livinia's trial was held in Hertford in the same month. Seraphina attended. She sat in the front row, and she wore the pearls of her mother, and she did not veil her face. She wanted Livinia to see her. She wanted Livinia to know that the girl she had locked in a cellar had walked out of that cellar and across a year and into a life her stepmother could not touch. Livinia saw her. Livinia's face, across the courtroom, when she first caught sight of Seraphina seated beside the Duke of Wyndmere, was a thing Seraphina would remember with a strange, still satisfaction for the rest of her life. It was not triumph she felt. It was closer to the feeling one has when a door that has been stuck for years finally swings open with no resistance at all. Livinia was convicted on all charges. She was sentenced to 14 years of transportation to New South Wales. Cordelia, who wept throughout the proceedings and insisted she had known nothing, received a lesser sentence of 7. Lord Percival, when his role was made plain, was already beyond the reach of English law in a rented villa near Naples. But his name was stricken from 2 clubs, and his sisters found themselves no longer invited to certain houses in town, which was, Seraphina thought, perhaps punishment enough for a man whose only coin was reputation. Alasdair took her home to Wyndmere that evening, and they did not speak of any of it on the journey. She sat with her head against his shoulder and his arm around her, and she watched the hedges pass, and when they reached the gates at dusk, with the lights of the hall burning in every window as they had burned on the night he had brought her there for the first time, she understood that this was the life she was to have, and that she had not asked for it, and that she did not deserve it any more or less than any other soul, and that it was hers. It was hers. No one would take it from her again. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you will really enjoy them. And do not forget to subscribe if you have not already. See you in the next story. But first, let me give you the end of this one, because a story like this deserves its last chapter told properly. A year passed at Wyndmere. The gardens, which had been kept up but not loved, came back to themselves under Seraphina's hand. She reopened the rose walk her mother would have approved of, and she planted Isolde's favorite white hyacinths in a bed beneath her window, because Alasdair had told her once that his sister had loved them, and she wished the house to know that it had not forgotten. The library saw more use in that year than it had seen in the previous 20. Neighbors who had not crossed the Wyndmere threshold in a decade found themselves invited, warily at first, then with real gladness, to quiet dinners at which the Duke actually spoke, and actually laughed, and sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, looked at his young wife the way men in poems look at women in poems. The staff, who had loved him all along and had feared for him, began to breathe easier. Mrs. Penrose cried more than once, though never in company. The house was not merely awake now. The house was happy. It had been a very long time. In the autumn, Seraphina bore a daughter. They named her Helen, for Seraphina's mother. She was small and loud and furiously healthy, and she had Alasdair's gray eyes and Seraphina's stubborn mouth, and the first time Alasdair held her, alone in the bedchamber with Seraphina still exhausted against the pillows, he sat upon the edge of the bed and looked at the child, and said nothing for a very long time. Seraphina, half drowsing, watched him. At last he said, very quietly, I did not know a man could have this twice. Seraphina reached out her hand. He took it. You did not, she said. You have it now. It is a different thing. It is allowed to be. He did not speak of his first wife often, nor of the little boy they had lost. But on a gray afternoon that winter, when Helen was a month old and sleeping in her cradle by the fire, He took Seraphina's hand and led her through the east wing of the house to a door she had never seen opened. Inside was a small chamber, tidy and cold, the curtains drawn. A nursery, an abandoned nursery, a painted cradle, a rocking horse covered in a dust sheet. A small blue coat hung on a peg, too small for any child living. "I have not come in here," he said, "in 9 years." He looked at her. "I should like to open it again. With your permission. For Helen. If you do not wish it, we will close the door and speak no more of it. I will understand." Seraphina walked to the small blue coat. She touched the sleeve. It was soft. It smelled of cedar and long stillness. "What was his name?" she asked. She had not asked before. "Thomas," Alasdair said. "After my father." "Then this is Thomas's room," she said, "and it will remain Thomas's room, because this is where he lived. But we will open another for Helen, down the corridor, with its own cradle and its own curtains, and when she is old enough to understand, we will tell her that she had a brother once, a little boy who never grew up, who was much loved, and who is part of her family, though she will never meet him. He will not be a secret. He will be a person. Your sister too, Alasdair. Isolde will be a person. They will belong to us. And we will keep their rooms as we keep their memory, as warm as we can." Alasdair did not speak. He only came and stood beside her at the small blue coat, and after a long while he laid his own hand, very gently, against the sleeve beside hers, and she understood that some things that have been closed for 9 years need only one willing witness to open them again. On the anniversary of her wedding day, which was also the anniversary of the cellar, Seraphina asked Alasdair to walk with her to the far end of the gardens, to a place she had never shown him. He came without question. He had learned, over the year of their marriage, that when Seraphina asked him for something quiet, it was usually because she had been thinking about it for some weeks and had arrived at a place where words would not serve and needed to show him instead. She led him through the yew walk, past the rose garden she had replanted, past the lake where the geese were gathering for winter, to a small, square plot of ground against the old stone wall at the garden's end. She had planted it in spring. It had taken until now to flower. "White roses," she said, "a whole bed of them, for my mother. And in the center, one climbing rose of a deep, dark red. That one," she said, "is for the cellar." Alasdair looked at the red rose. He did not understand at once. "I do not," he began. "I do not want to forget it," she said. "That is the thing, Alasdair. I thought for a while that I should want to forget, that a happy woman ought to shut that door behind her and never open it again. But I have thought about it, and I have decided that I do not want to forget, because if I forget, I will forget the girl who sat against the door in the dark and screamed when she heard your voice in the hall above. And she deserves to be remembered. She was very brave, braver than I gave her credit for at the time. She was me. She was the me who got us here." He was quiet. Then he reached for her hand. "It was you who came for me," she said. "I will never forget that. But it was also I who answered. I who screamed when I heard you. I who put my hand in yours in the cellar and walked out of that house and did not look back. I want to remember that too. The red rose is for her, for that girl, so that I know, every year when it blooms, that I did not leave her behind in the dark. I carried her out with me, and I carry her still." Alasdair drew her against him. He kissed the top of her head. He did not speak for a long while. When he did, it was to say, simply, "She was the bravest person I have ever met, Seraphina. You still are." She leaned against him. The wind moved through the yew hedge. Somewhere above them, in the open window of the nursery, they could hear Helen beginning to cry for her supper, and Mrs. Penrose's voice, low and laughing, answering her. "We should go in," Seraphina said. "Yes," Alasdair said, "but not yet. Just a little longer." And so they stood together at the foot of the garden, the Duke who had ridden through a night of rain to break down a door, and the girl who had answered from behind it, and between them, in a bed of white roses, a single red one bloomed in the late autumn light. And somewhere inside the house, a baby was crying to be fed, and a fire was being laid in a nursery that had been closed for 9 years, and the world was going on, as the world does. But here, in this small square of ground, a door that had once been locked was open at last, and it was never going to close again. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you will really enjoy them. And do not forget to subscribe if you have not already. See you in the next story.